is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This episode number 536. This is the only podcast with two intro musics. By the way, I think in the podcasting realm,
we just bring you more value than any other podcast.
We have the classic, and then we have the mood setting, the snooze crushing intro as well. My name is Marshall. I'm with Limited Resources, and joining me on the line all the way from Denver, it's Luis Scott-Vargas. Luis, how are you, man? How are you hanging in there through what has become a very strange time in our lives?
Yeah, this is, I don't know, for folks, who are young enough to not have gone to Vietnam or been in any of the other wars. I guess Desert Storm is not too far back, but this is one of the biggest events I think that we've ever faced. It's just incredible, and I don't know, it's tough. I mean, I think that everyone really I didn't realize how quickly things were going to accelerate. When I signed off last week, talked about things, but it was still not feeling real to me. And now it's like mega real.
Yeah. Just to talk about it for a second, we're not going to go on and on. We know that you can get information about the coronavirus situation many different places. But we did, or at least I think you're with me on this, just did want to say, respect it. I still see people, kind of thinking, well, it's not that big of a deal, or it doesn't kill that many people, or those type of things, and not really understanding the infrastructure related impacts that something like this has. It's not just about the numbers of percentage of people who die from it. There's a lot more to it than that. And you can see a good use case in Italy. So, Luis and I are both practicing our social distancing. We're working from home. Now, for us, this is pretty typical, as our jobs were work from home before. But in any case, we're making the necessary changes to try to, as they say, flatten the curve. And we certainly hope that you will as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Now, we also recognize, though, that this show and many of the different types of content that you consume can be a really useful distraction from it. And that's why we don't want to dwell on it too much on the show here, because, again, we know that you can get this information other places. But as rare as it is, when Luis and I feel strongly about something, we do like to use the platform we have to make sure we talk about it. We don't want to make it so that that's all this show is. But when it does pop up, it's relevant. With that said, we've got a jam-packed show for you this week. We've got tips, tricks, interactions, combos, all this type of stuff for Theros Beyond Death that you may or may not have been aware of, or maybe just need a little refresher on. Because look, since a lot of people are stuck at home, I gotta figure that a lot of people are playing even more Magic than normal, particularly on digital platforms like Arena and Magic Online. I mean, we're all stuck at home, right? It's you got to find some ways to kind of distract yourself and keep yourself in good spirits, because this thing can be very taxing, especially if you have anxiety or anything like that. And we got to teach you how to win and enjoy yourself the most. This is still part of life, enjoying the things that you love. And, if Magic's one of those, well, you definitely came to the right place, because this is a place where we love Magic, specifically Limited. Of course, we try to teach you how to improve at it, but we do take a pretty big picture approach. A lot of our concepts apply to Magic in general as well. Before we get into our main topic and our crack-a-pack and all that other stuff, we've got to mention our sponsor, channelfireball.com. Luis, what do you have to say from CFB?
Well, for those who maybe, haven't seen the announcement I put out yesterday, we at Channel Fireball did decide that we're going to be shutting down our warehouse operations starting on Monday. That's March 23rd. So a couple days from now. And we'll be accepting orders and processing and shipping those orders, any order that comes in before midnight Friday. So that's tomorrow, as of when we're recording this, midnight Pacific time on Friday. And until then, we're offering 10% back on store credit with any cash order. And we'd love if you wanted to buy some cards. We're not sure when we're going to be able to get fully back up and running. This is just a temporary closure, but we can't predict the future any more than anyone else. We just think it's a good idea to shut down, given the safety and health of our employees, and of course the community is very high in terms of what our priorities are. It's in fact the most important, and so that's why we're making this decision. But yeah, it's going to be a tough time for ours and many other businesses as a result. I mean, we just don't know where this is heading. So, I do want to note that the buy list is still open. We are able to run that without the use of our warehouse. So we're going to continue accepting buy submissions, and we're still doing the buy list bonanza promotion. We're going to follow through with that. We've got, 12 days left in the month here. And so you've still got 12 days to send us cards and submit buy orders, in which case you could win cards like the Black Lotus. We're giving away boxes. We're doing a lot of giveaways. You can go to channelfireball.com/giveaway for full details. And we're going to keep that going as long as we can. Of course, basically everything right now comes with a caveat, unless, because we at some point, things might take a turn for even more serious, in which case, who knows? But we're going to do our best to keep things going. And, in terms of content, like here on LR, we're going to be doing plenty of cool content. We're going to try to figure out ways to, hopefully inject some humor, entertainment, everything else you're looking for from home, because it's the time for that right now.
Well, I think that's great. I think you guys are taking the appropriate actions. And also, I just want to say thanks to you and to CFB. I can't imagine what a difficult time this is when, people aren't spending and, you have to shut down your operations and stuff. It must be a really tough time. So thanks for hanging in there for us. I think that anybody who interacts with CFB will appreciate that. Again, so that's Monday. You said that they're shutting down, but you'll take orders until Friday, the 20th of March. Is that correct?
Yeah. So this podcast is going to come out today on the 19th. So you have until tomorrow night, Friday, March 20th at midnight Pacific time to place orders and have us ship and fulfill those orders. After that, we're temporarily closing until we deem it safe to open again, or until maybe someone smarter than us deems it safe to open again. Okay.
Well, hang in there, bud. Also, that brings us to the Patreon, which is it's critical. I have to say we got a bunch of new patrons, and I really want to say thank you to everybody, not just the new ones, but everybody on the Patreon. I mean, this is how podcasts like this exist, and at times like this, it really means a lot that people take the time. I know that, a couple of bucks a month or whatever it ends up being, isn't the difference between surviving and not. But I also know that, mentalities can change in times of uncertainty. And, the fact that people have stuck with us and even, in fact, have actually grown the Patreon is really touching and extremely appreciated, especially given, at least for me, normally I do coverage and have coverage gigs and stuff like that. And those are all canceled. And that's just, a big part of my income that just goes away. So I wanted to say thank you from the bottom of my heart to everybody on the Patreon. It really, really means a lot. If you want to check that out at all, it's patreon.com/limited resources. And we try to put some cool bonuses on there. I've been trying to do some extra stuff for this. I just put up another bonus draft video. This one's actually the Vintage Cube. And it might be the worst deck I've ever drafted in the Vintage Cube. Certainly the worst that ever made it onto a video. It is one of the most ridiculous videos I've had, including some extremely improbable things happening. If you want a little bit of entertainment, I don't know how much you're going to get out of it from the, I might have learned something or improved or whatever. But if you're not entertained, after this video,
you have no heart.
Yeah, you're a lost cause, because this thing, I recorded this last night at like 2 a.m. I couldn't sleep, and I'm just like, all right, we're just going to do it. And it was ridiculous. So that is up. I'll put a link to it in the show notes. It'll also be up on the Patreon. I'm putting those up, by the way. I did another one last week as well, and I'll do another. Those are not, just for anybody that's on the Patreon ever, those are not like paid posts, right? Those are not like considered shows. Those are for free. They're just, extra content from your friends at LR there. Again, we're just trying to do our part. I tweeted about this last week and talked about it too, but just recognizing that even though it feels uncertain and unclear, this is actually the time when you lean on content creators the most. I mean, I've listened to more podcasts and watched more YouTube content and stuff in the past week than I normally do by a fair bit. And I'm a pretty big consumer anyway. So I recognize our role in that as well. And we just, again, want to try to get as much out as possible, including an absurd draft video of the vintage cube.
Yeah, and Marshall and I have been kicking it around. We depending on our time. I'm actually, funnily enough, I was telling Marshall I'm more busy now, just because we're looking for digital solutions, and a lot more stuff has been thrown on my plate than normal. But if we have time, well, maybe we'll try to squeak out an extra episode or something like that. I think that with the vintage cube coming back, which I actually did play a part in, funnily enough, by harassing the Magic Online account on Twitter for it.
Yeah, you did. you're the hero we needed.
I'm kind of feeling doing like a bonus cube episode, so we'll work on that.
I would love that. Yeah. So again, we're going to try to do as much as we can to fill your ear holes for as long as possible here while we're all stuck at home. One of the cool things you also get on the Patreon, by the way, is the question of the week. And this one comes from Atipong, who says, how much work is put into editing each episode? If an episode is 1 hour long, how long did you actually record before
I'll take
the
this
edit?
one.
You've never edited an episode in your life. Oh my God.
From my perspective, none.
Yeah.
You finish recording and then, the episode just kind of goes up.
Right. So this is a great question, Atipong, that gets asked every once in a while. And I'll tell you, so there's a few different methodologies that get put into play when it comes to how to edit. And we kind of have, two of the more extremes represented, at least at different points on LR. The way that we do it, the way that I do it is I do not go through and edit what they call edit for content, meaning there's people that will take their podcast and then they'll edit out basically every awkward pause, every little section that kind of goes off topic and then comes back and just clean it up. Basically edit the content itself, the words that were spoken and the silences and the ums and that kind of stuff. I don't do that. So my theory on this has always been that ideally you have a co-host that you have good enough chemistry with, where you can hold a conversation going back and forth and there's not huge pauses or massive tangents where you're just going like, what are we even listening to anymore? Sometimes you'll listen to shows where they get completely off topic for 15 minutes and you're just going like, what is happening? On our show, we use show notes and then the chemistry between me and the co-host, to hopefully try to minimize that, because what we want this to be is conversational. This show is meant to be hanging out with me, Luis, and you. And that's what we want the show to feel like. We don't want it to be like super stripped down, super clean, only words that matter, nothing else. It's meant to be fun and a bit of a hangout for a while. So we do that. Now, if you look at the far other end of the spectrum, you can go back to that post-produced episode that I did where I interviewed Ben Stark and Huey. And I did a fully post-produced episode. Now that every single second of that was edited. Every piece of everything has edit cuts and moves and all of this stuff in that, where that was, I was going for a much more defined message on that one rather than the conversational tone that this has. So for an average show, it takes me probably about 20 minutes, maybe half an hour to edit it. And our shows are usually an hour to an hour and a half long. But that's putting in music, that's chopping out the things. If there is a long pause or, if Julie, the dog, comes running in and barks and Luis has to go grab her, or, one of us gets a delivery or something like that, I'll cut that part out because I don't want to have the listener sitting there having to wait and listen through that. But otherwise, I'm just getting everything aligned, putting the music in, making sure that the audio's right, the levels are correct, doing that kind of stuff and not editing the content. So yeah, it takes, I don't know, it takes, half an hour to get all of that done. I had one other thing I wanted to say, but I forget. Why don't we just crack a pack instead? Thanks for the question.
That works for me.
Here is our crack a pack. What do you want to open, Luis? It'd be reasonable. Now, come on, let's not.
I know you don't like Timuret, but I would love to open Timuret.
Come on, I love Timuret. Don't say that. I have two mythic uncommons in the set, and it's Timuret and Elspeth's Nightmare. And interestingly, both of those I rated, fine when I saw them, and now I have them really, really high. It turns out graveyards are important in this set. Who knew? Yeah. First card, Omen of the Sun.
I like Omen of the Sun. Omen of the Sun does the job you want it to do, and I think it's a fine card. I'm not going to be overjoyed to first pick it, but I'm not like super bummed about it either.
Triton Wave Rider.
Now this one I would be unhappy to first pick.
It's a brick. What about Underworld Rage Hound? That's the 3/1. We that card's kind of gone up and down. Where are you at on it these days?
It's okay. I'm not thrilled about it. I guess it's kind of like Omen of the Sun. You don't really want to take one of these cards early, but they are fine cards.
Classic C. Aspect of Lamprey. This is the black one that gives lifelink and makes them discard.
I have been pretty down on Aspect of Lamprey, honestly. It just hasn't really delivered. The fact that making them discard fuels their escape cards, it costs 4 mana, it doesn't add stats. I'm just not really into it.
Yeah, it's also risky, right? Like you're spending 4, and if they do interact with your creature, it's a disaster. Cetizen Training, that's the one that gives +1/+0 and trample, and it's a cantrip.
Yeah, this is fine. We're not really getting any cards that you're realistically going to pick early unless you've got a terrible pack.
Witness of Tomorrows, which Adam calls Scry Fly Guy.
Yeah, that is a very descriptive way to name for it.
Yeah, it's a gift.
Witness of Tomorrows is fine. It really is not that it's not that impressive.
No, it's a fine 5-drop. But the thing that you noted really early in the format does come up, which is the fact that it's an enchantment is in many ways a liability. When they nab your 5 mana card for 2 mana, it's pretty rough. And there's multiple ways to do that in the set. Elusian Caryatid.
I have not been super impressed with the Caryatid. It's an okay card, but it's just too easy for it to die to like Mogi's Favor is of course the worst thing that it can die to, but even die to like Omen of the Forge is pretty bad because I don't think Omen of the Forge is all that good. So having a card that gets sniped by it is pretty annoying.
Yeah, and there's a few pingers too, right? Like red really has its way with this. There's 2 at uncommon, the Sacrifice one and the Dreamstalker Manticore. And then there's also Wrap in Flames, which just incidentally kills it. It does have some pretty big liabilities just being the 1 toughness. Also, I always forget about the power 4 or greater thing, so it's really bad for me. Towering Wave Mystic.
Towering Wave Mystic is terrible. Yeah, I would not play this card.
Yeah, so this is a card that people have been playing more recently, but I still have not found myself enticed by it. Daybreak Chimera, solid. Traveler's Amulet, sure. Wow, these comments not super great. We didn't get any removal at all, did we?
No. We largely bricked here.
All right, let's lean on our uncommons. And hey, look, it's Elspeth's Nightmare.
Ooh, I do like that one. Elspeth's Nightmare is quite strong, so I'm in for that.
Same. This next one has disappointed a bit. Slaughter Priest of Mogus. This is the 2/2. Yeah, and it's a weird card. Like this one might make my always have to read it when somebody plays it against me card for the Sunset Show because it always gets +2/+0 whenever you sacrifice a permanent, but it doesn't get first strike unless it was the thing sacrificing the permanent or the creature or enchantment. And it's always like, which one does it get? How does this work? But I don't know. When I see this card, I don't think, oh, wow, a Slaughter Priest. It's late. I'm just like, yeah, whatever.
Is this going to be one of those like extremely rare Sunset shows where we're not like chomping at the bit to be done with the format?
Yes, this is going to be that for sure. Yeah.
That's kind of what it feels like to me, to be honest. So... yeah,
but yeah, Slaughter Priest not nearly as good as Elspeth's.
Oh, as a multicolored card, it's worse than Elspeth's Nightmare straight up, and it's a multicolored card. So it's not a particularly hard decision, I don't think.
Destiny Spinner, 1 and a green, 2/3 with text on it. It turns out a creature and enchantment spells you control can't be countered, and then you can pay 4 mana to wake up a land that's an XX Trampler equal to the number of enchantments you control. Really good 2-drop, just super solid, but nowhere near Elspeth's Nightmare still.
No. I mean, I do like Destiny Spinner, but yeah, I would not take it over Elspeth's Nightmare. It's a good card, though.
Yeah. Our rare is Perforos's Intervention. This is red X sorcery. Choose one. You get an X1 red elemental creature with trample and haste. You sacrifice it at the beginning of the end step, or it deals twice X damage to target creature or planeswalker.
Yeah, easy intervention. This card is very powerful. It's the most powerful card in the pack, and it's splashable. So I'm happy enough. Perforos's Intervention has saved us all.
What about Elspeth's Nightmare?
I think the intervention's much better. I do like Elspeth's Nightmare. Don't get me wrong. I just think Perforos Intervention is really where you want to be.
One of these is a 2-for-1. The other
That's
one
true.
is not. I'm taking Elspeth's Nightmare.
I would just take the intervention. Just being able to kill anything is really good.
Yeah, it is. And it is actually efficient. Normally when you see red X, you think, well, I got to kill a 4 toughness. I got to pay 5 mana. That's not the case with this. Also, you really can just kill people with the elemental creature. Like if the game just goes long, you're just like, here, it's an 8/8 or an 8/1 or whatever. It can make life difficult. All right, I'll put that. You know what? I'm going to put that and the Elspeth's Nightmare and the Forest in the giveaway pile. I remembered what I was going to say, by the way, about the editing thing. We do put up an unedited version of the podcast at certain Patreon tiers in case you're interested in listening to additional nonsense from Luis and I. Okay. So this week we are going to be going actually very deep on tips, tricks, interactions. I don't know what to call these exactly, but the little weird things that come up in a format when you've played a lot of it, right? When it's late in the format and you've kind of tried out all the stuff and you've seen the interactions. And we came up with a list of about as many as we could remember off the top of our head. I'm sure you're going to send us more of them, and I do want to hear them as well. But let's get into it. I'll start off with Lagana Band Storyteller. So this is a scenario that actually happened to me at the GP in Reno, and it's freaking brutal. So if your opponent casts Elspeth Conquers Death and lets it go through all of its chapters, they're already in a really good place to win the game. If they then cast Lagana Band Storyteller, they can gain 5 life and put the Conquer's Death back on top of the library, which is, again, pretty devastating. And so that's just a great 1-2 punch right there. But also if they have a way for the storyteller to die before the 3rd chapter goes, like if you have a sacrifice or whatever, you can get it back with the 3rd chapter of Elspeth Conquers Death and then get back the Elspeth Conquers Death. So that is a completely busted loop that I don't know if you've ever been at the bad end of it, but I have, and it sucks.
I have, and there's a budget version with Omen of Death. Where you Lagana Band Storyteller an Omen of Death back, then you trade off the Storyteller, and then you Omen of Death it back. Woof.
Why are you tweeting? I see you tweeting right now. I'm going to reply to you, by the way. I caught you.
I was asked to do this specifically. This was a special request.
What, the tweet?
Yeah.
How would you know about the request, though?
Because I had earlier told Mashi that I would signal boost his tweet. What?
So,
it's true.
And you happen to see his tweet.
Well, I have Twitter open. I mean, what am I not going to?
I obviously do too, because I just saw your tweet, so right. I can't go on that one.
All I'm saying, look, for those of you who want to listen to a more fun-filled podcast that's not so strict about being on the ball and not being distracted.
Wow! So now you're gonna shill for Magic FM.
Yeah, I'm going on Magic FM tonight, and we're going to just kind of have a grab bag episode and just talk about nonsense. So
no, that's cool. What can people expect from Magic FM? Hard-hitting, limited content, or
not so much that? Mostly, again, just straight up nonsense, and us, me, Gabby, and Mashi talking about just whatever it is that we've decided is relevant at this point in time. So it's a kind of, we often do, it's not on my podcast. I'm on there maybe once a month. But it's a lot of like news, magic news. It's, special topics, just things that they think are timely and a fair bit of nonsense. So it's kind of like a news variety podcast. And today we're just going to go on and kind of, shoot and talk about nonsense.
Oh, they must have a much more lax policy on swearing over there, too. My God. Now I have to go through and edit that.
Look, that's just an expression.
Yeah, it didn't offend me, but all right. What's our next one? Okay, this is one that we've known for quite a while, but again, I went over some of the ones that we discovered early anyway. Rapid Flames. You can hit your own heroes, the creatures that have the word hero. They have the heroic ability where they pump up your team when they get targeted, and you can Rapid Flames your hero and then also use the other 2 pings on Rapid Flames to take out creatures or blockers. and get a big alpha swing in. That's a nice finisher if you have cards like Hero of the Pride and that kind of thing in your deck.
Yeah, and that's the classic combo with Wrap in Flames is to be like. My favorite is when you're like nearly mono white and you're just flashing a couple Wrap in Flames and maybe a hero or what have you, and you're just you just set it up where you're like, target my hero, target your 2 creatures, and then just easily kill you.
Yeah, and the damage output ends up being huge because you're doing both at once. You're adding to your board and taking away from theirs, which is a great recipe for an alpha strike. Yeah,
you end up in a spot where you often will kill them, and if you don't kill them, you get very, very close to doing so.
Right. Leonin of the Lost Pride. So this is the 3/1 that when it dies, you can exile a card from your opponent's graveyard. I saw people asking about this at the GP. Like, what if it trades off with like a Loathsome Chimera or something like that? Can I exile the card that it actually traded with? And the answer is,
oh yeah, you sure can.
Absolutely. So keep that in mind. If you do find yourself in a situation where you really need to get rid of a card that's on board, if you can trade off and have them both die, you will get the trigger and you can still target it in the graveyard and everything. Thassa Deep Dwelling. There's a lot of combos in the set, but just a couple that came to mind. One of them, which absolutely destroyed me once again at the GP, is Illyrios. So Illyrios is the 2/3 that ETB's tapped and stays tapped as long as you have the Reflection, which is the 3/2 that it comes along with. But Illyrios can be blinked, come back in, and the Reflection tokens are not legendary. And so you just get a free 3/2 every turn that you have Thassa Deep Dwelling plus Illyrios on the battlefield. And that is completely absurd.
Oh yeah, I think Thassa is a first pick bomb, and this is one of the better interactions with it. But there's a lot of ways to get a ton of value off Thassa. You can combine it with black if you've got Gray Merchant, white if you've got Reverent Hoplite, and even within blue, Illyrios is likely the best option you have. But there's just a lot of things that get a lot of value. Plus, it also makes it so all your creatures can't be hit by negative auras like Ichthyomorphosis or anything like that. I guess Dreadful Apathy they probably still get you, but.
And then there's also a weird rules interaction too. So if you steal a creature with Portent of Betrayal or in any way get a creature, you can do it with a Crow and War or whatever, and then you blink it with Thassa, you get to keep it because Thassa's ability says under your control. It says return it under your control, not under its owner's control, and you just get to keep it for the rest of the game.
Yeah, that's really good.
Yeah, it's a weird combo to set up because there's not a lot of decks that want Thassa Deep Dwelling and also Portent of Betrayal. But like, again, a Crow and War, like you're going to put that into any deck that can cast it for the most part. And that's a great way to blink a creature and actually get to keep it. And it's something that's a little bit unintuitive because we're used to blinked creatures going back under their owner's control, but that's not the case with Thassa.
Yeah.
Another thing for Portent of Betrayal, this doesn't come up very often, but it can be a swinging play when it does, which is if you have Portent of Betrayal, you can target your own creatures with it. Generally speaking, this would be like an extreme late game scenario where you had it in your hand and then you top decked a creature and you had enough mana to pay for both. You can play the creature and then cast Portent on it, and that'll give it haste, and you could potentially, surprise your opponent with a hasty creature that they didn't see coming.
Yeah, it's not it's a play that I think on average you basically wouldn't make. Most people are not going to have a reason to do this their entire time they play Theros. But it is true that I have over the course of me playing Magic probably like 5 or 6 times used a threaten on my own creature in order to get an attack that turn. Yeah,
we're going for the extreme interactions here. So, if it's weird and we're going deep, then that's it. Again, these aren't things that come up from game to game, but they're good to know if you're going to play a lot of the format, which we have. Next one, Shimmerwing Chimera plus whatever. Omens are kind of the obvious go-to, but you could just set up these engines where you can get value from basically any of them, particularly cards like Omen of the Sea do well. Omen of the Sun, which we opened, is a fine target for it as well. A little less so with Omen of the Dead because you do need a continuous string of targets. But at any rate, Shimmerwing Chimera plus any number of things, of course, is something you should look out for. This next one's interesting. It's Nessian Boar. So this has to do with the timing of it.
There's a lot with Nessian Boar.
Yeah. And the one that I'm focusing on here, and if you have any others, I'd love to hear as well. But I've seen people concede, and I don't know if they knew what they had in their library or what, but concede what I would consider to be a bit too early to an alpha strike with Nessian Boar and a bunch of friends. So the idea behind Nessian Boar is that sometimes you cast it or your opponent casts it and then doesn't attack with it for multiple turns to build up a lethal alpha strike. Then they attack with it, use that ability that it must be blocked, and then all the rest of their creatures get through it and they can kill you. This is a strategy that comes up occasionally. A lot of times they just start jamming with it, but sometimes you'll see them wait. Well, here's the thing. The timing on this is actually that you block with all of your creatures, and then once you do, a trigger goes on the stack for each creature blocking it that you get to draw a card. Okay, most people know about that, but a lot of times they look and go, but I'm dead, right? Like I have to block all of this, and then I'm going to take 12 or whatever from the other creature, so I'm just going to scoop. But remember, you get to draw those cards before damage happens. So if you have instant speed ways to interact with the other cards, leave your mana available if you suspect this alpha strike, block with your 4 or 5 creatures, draw 4 or 5 cards, and then if you find a removal spell or something that could keep you alive, you'll be glad you didn't concede, even if you thought, well, I'm probably dead anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is obviously a lot of extra outs when you're seeing a bunch of those cards. So I actually kind of want to do like a deep dive on Nessian Boar, because a lot of people don't understand this card. First things first, it's a bomb. It's very good. Mm-hmm. You should take it over like Final Death or Elspeth's Nightmare, Grey Merchant. It's better than those cards. It's better than Mire's Grasp. I guess there's non-black cards that are good too. It's better than Dreadful Apathy. I was just naming good cards, and they all have to be black. But so the reason Nessian Boar is so good is that you do not have to attack with it. It might be surprising to know, but when they have 2 creatures and 5 mana untapped, don't attack with your Nessian Boar. Just don't do it, because what you're asking for, and I've seen this happen. I had a draft. It was actually on stream where I had Nessian Boar, and my opponent left a bunch of mana up, and I just didn't attack, played another creature, and then they were just like, ugh, and then they just used a bounce spell end of turn or something like that, or a kill spell, which they clearly you out. Yes, because what will happen is your opponent plays Nessian Boar, you have Final Death, you're like, okay, go. I'm the cleverest Magic player in the world, and then they attack you. You block with 2 things, draw 2 cards, then Final Death their Boar, and you're just like, I earned that. But the truth is, especially against Final Death, which costs 5 mana, you can just pass with the Boar. And what it does is it puts your opponent in a position where if they ever tap out, the Boar wrecks them.
Yep.
And so now it's constricting their plays significantly, while not costing you any additional resources to do that. And so then the other thing is there's plenty of combos with Nessian Boar. Of course, the wings combo with it to give it flying, as does like Eutropia, or, anything like that can give it evasion is very good because it hits super hard, 10 power. It goes well with trample. And sometimes you just save it up where you get to alpha strike them. Maybe they draw 3 cards and they even kill the Boar afterwards, but your other creatures did so much damage to them that it ends up being very, very good. So when you're dealing with Nessian Boar, I think that it just the biggest key to level yourself up there is that you're not forced to send it in. You can keep it back, and that will make it so your opponent has to play really weird and often poorly, like not enact the game plan they want. Because if they tap out for their 5-drop, your Boar is just going to wreck them. And imagine even, right, they have like a 3/3 or even a 4/4 out, and they play another big creature, but they're tapped out now. Imagine if you have a removal or bounce spell and your Boar just 1-to-1 kills something. That puts them in a horrible position. Yeah, maybe they're not down a card because they drew a card, but now you've got a Boar plus whatever other creatures you had in play, and then their board is empty. And then now they're in the same place where if they just tap out for a creature, the board just eats it, and that's an untenable position for them. Right. Like they're just not going to win from that position. So
right.
I think Nessian Boar is very good, and I think when you're playing with, there's a lot you can do to maximize the value without running into you don't have to run into their stupid Stern Dismissal or Final Death. It's just not mandatory to do that.
What would you, if I flipped it around on you and said, okay, so you're the player who's facing down the Boar, and your opponent is playing well and just not attacking with it sometimes. Mm-hmm. Is it just forcing you to play face up? Is it just like, all right, I have the Final Death, I'm just going to, I'm just going to use it I'm not going to get my opponent. They're not going to fall for my trap here. And you just use it.
Yeah. So I would recommend when you're playing against someone and you have final death and then they pass and don't attack you with the boar, that you should not try to wait and get additional value. They've already told you they're not going to fall for that.
Right. So just fire it off. Yeah. Okay. Anything else on Nessie or Big Pig or whatever you want to call her?
I think Nessie Boar's awesome, and just be mindful of what your opponents can have, and again, you're not forced to run into things. So
okay. Next is Protean Thaumaturs. So this card, if an enchantment enters the battlefield, you can copy another creature. But one of the cool things that does happen is if you can wait to cast it until you have an omen available, you can re-clone or clone at instant speed, even in response to something. Because a lot of times I see people run it out on turn 2 with no other creatures on the battlefield. And it's very vulnerable as a 1/1, yet the potential of this card is very high. It's actually, quite a powerful Magic card, especially as the game progresses into the mid to late game where there's really juicy targets for you to copy. Particularly on the other side of the battlefield where you can get access to cards that you don't have in your library at all. Or if you just cast like any 5-drop, like any 5-ball that you put in your whole deck, if you can just copy it, from your 2-mana creature, it's a big tempo gain for you and can put you in a really good position. But if you run that thing out on turn 2, it opens it up to dying to all types of things like Omen of the Forge or Mire's Grasp and stuff, 1-for-1 removal that trades for it on an even basis, where if you can wait a little bit and hold it in your hand and then play it on a turn when you also have the ability to instant speed copy something, you can respond to those type of effects if you'd like, or just keep it up. You can also do it after combat. Like you can go like block and then flash this in, trade this thing into a much bigger card. And your opponent doesn't know this. Like they when they go to attacks, they see it as a 1/1 and they have to think, well, do you have the ability to turn it into, say, the 4/4 Voracious Typhon that happens to be on the battlefield as well at instant speed? And they have to make this calculation. If you just run the thing out there, they could just kill it and not have to deal with it at all. So keep that in mind. Instant speed enchantments like the Omens particularly give you a lot of flexibility with that card. And I've seen people just run it out too much.
Yeah. It's a cheap enough card that you don't have to be in a spot where you're forced to run it out immediately. You can hold it for quite some time.
Right. Also, because it's only a 1/1, it's not like that would be the difference. Right. Like it's very, it's not blocking particularly well. That reminds me, I did want to have a chat with you. Yeah. About here. Let's just do this right now. Did you see the conversation on Twitter? I was on it I can't remember if you were or not, but Ben talking about Devourer.
Oh yeah. I was on that conversation. I didn't really chime in because I didn't feel too strongly about it, but yes, I saw that. So the conversation was basically someone asking about a pick and Ben saying Devourer was essentially a bomb, right? Right.
So here's how it went. There was a draft pick that the person had sent in that was like 5 or 6 cards left in the pack or something. And like every single one of them was blue or black. It was just absurd. Like this is one of those weird drafts that comes together where you're the only person in those colors at all somehow. So it had a bunch of very good stuff in it and, really worth considering. And the player was asking me and you and Ben and a few others, hey, how would you rank these or what would you take out of the pack? And This player had already been drafting Dimir, so they were already in heavy blue-black. And some of the cards in the pack were Prophecy was in there.
Metamized Prophecy.
Prophecy, Omen of the Sea, One with the Stars, the Devourer, were kind of the ones that stood out. And I ranked them in response to the person. And I had the only non-blue black card was a Traveler's Amulet. And I had Traveler's Amulet last with Devourer above that. And then all the other cards ahead of it. Like I had Omen of the Sea, Prophet, or it wasn't Omen of the Sea, excuse me. It was Thirst for Meaning, not Omen of the Sea. So I had Thirst for Meaning as a card that I would have taken, then Minimize Prophecy, then like One with the Stars, then something else I can't remember, and then
Devour.
Devourer. Yeah,
and
like
Ben
I
was
had
just like slam Devourer.
right, and he was like, Devourer's just amazing. It's like it does exactly what you want for these decks because he considers it a good blocker somehow, which I don't really understand what he means by that. And then the other part I do understand, which is he says that for your 2-mana card, it can end the game. And that is true. If you get yourself to the late game, it can start hitting for 3 or 4 damage and kind of present itself as a must kill. And then, he considers the milling part to be, an additional bonus that can help out a little bit too.
The milling part's definitely upside.
Yeah, I agree. But the part that I guess I got stuck on was that he really felt like it was a good blocker. And I'm like, is it? I mean, it can trade for something occasionally. It never can survive a block, like ever.
Yeah.
I'm like, how is this a good blocker? Like, this is just a creature that exists on the battlefield in the early part of the game. I don't know how you could make the leap to good blocker there. What was your thoughts on that? Because, again, Sigris came in. He agreed with me. He said he thought it was terrible, which I don't think it's quite terrible, but he said it's close to unplayable. And in blue-black, I basically don't even look at the card. Where Ben had it, like you said, near bomb status. I mean, he loved the card. What's your take on it?
I think Devourer is good. I think Ben was being, unsurprisingly, there's a little bit of hyperbole there.
Just the touch.
Because it's not a good blocker. I don't understand that part. It's a 2-1 in the sense that if you're playing against aggro and you play this on turn 2, you can block their Hero of the Pride on turn 3, and that's totally fine. I'm not going to argue that it won't accomplish that. But no, I don't think that. I think that Devourer is quite good. Look, here's the thing about 2-drops is a 2-drop that's good on turn 10 is actually worth quite a bit.
Yes.
Because basically all 2-drops are good on turn 2, right? That's like the whole point of 2-drops is that you're able to play it on turn 2 and it can interact. Every deck needs some amount of interaction early in the game. You can't just do nothing until turn 4, as much as I wish you could. So if you have your basic 2-drop, which is like, let's say 2 mana for a 2-1, no abilities, right? Though your Goblin Piker of the world. If you had that card in your opening hand, there's actually a game that I've been into recently called Slay the Spire. It's a deck building game, and as you level up your cards, one of the abilities is in it, which means it starts in your opening hand. If you could have that ability on Goblin Piker, where if this is in your deck, it starts in your opening hand, the card would be pretty good. I would always play that card because a 2-mana 2-1 on turn 2 is actually pretty solid. The biggest cost, though, is drawing it on turn 7. This card's miserable. It does nothing. Devourer is very good in the sense that on turn 2, it interacts and does everything a 2-drop needs to do. And then on turn 10, it's actually something better in a lot of ways because you can play it and then start dealing, 3 or 4 damage unblockable a turn as well as filling your graveyard. So I do think people underrate it. In fact, I think you were underrating it based on the list of cards you told me. Like you were saying like, hey, I like these cards more. And I think that I would put Devourer higher on the list than you did, though not as high as Ben.
Okay. I have the list, by the way. So it's Minimize Prophecy, One with the Stars, Devourer, Deny the Divine, Stern Dismissal, Thirst for Meaning, and then there's a Traveler's Amulet and a Glory Bearers. That's the whole pack.
I would, depending on what the deck looked like, lean towards Thirst then Devourer or Devourer then Thirst, but I think Devourer is better than all the other cards.
Okay, see, because I would go Thirst, Prophecy, One with the Stars, Devourer, Deny the Divine, Stern Dismissal, Traveler's Amulet. I think my reasoning is in blue-black, Devourer doesn't do anything that I really need it to do over cards like this. Like, I want card draw. Like, I want Minimize Prophecy and I want Thirst for Meaning in my deck. Where Devourer of Memory is not a good blocker. I don't know what Ben's thinking with that. Yes, it does trade for things, so it's an adequate blocker, but it's not good at blocking. It's just okay. And yeah, sure, it's a fine win condition for a 2-drop late game, but I need it to do things better in the early game to justify it. These decks, I almost never want a card like that. Like a 2-drop that can win the game. I don't put a big priority on that in these decks unless it can do good stuff early in the game, and this doesn't. It doesn't
do great stuff early in the game, but it does what a 2-drop is supposed to do, which is
trade off for another 2-drop.
Trade off for another 2-drop. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean,
that's fair.
Maybe you have a higher bar for cards than I do, but that's all I'm really looking for.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, the part I got hung up on with Ben's argument was what you said, which is just like saying it's a great blocker.
Ben is also just gonna make, it is. I find it to be more difficult to have discussions when people are saying like, this is the best card ever, like that sort of thing. Like this is a bomb or whatever. Right.
It does muddy the waters a little. Okay. Back to our list. Next card, Stinging Lionfish has the text. This is a big trivia. Or untap target non-land permanent on it.
I've never used it.
Even though nobody's ever untapped anything with it ever. I don't know if it could come up, but it is tap or untap. So just keep that in mind. This one comes up every once in a while, Gravebreaker Lamia. So this is the one that is a 4/4 lifelinker, but when ETBs, it lets you search your library for a card and put that card into your graveyard. Now, obviously, you're thinking to yourself, oh, sweet, I'll put some great escape card in my yard and I'll get a little bit of extra value. Good. That is where you should be going with the card. But if you draw Gravebreaker Lamia kind of later in the game, sometimes you pick up your library and you're like, I don't have any cards that care about the graveyard at all. Like I just, all my escape cards are gone or whatever.
But then Marshall, what are you going to do with the ability?
So what I'm going to do, this is good. See, now you're getting it. This is some real podcast co-hosting happening right here. What I'm going to do is take a card that I don't want to draw and put that in my graveyard. And sometimes that's even like a basic land. Sometimes you're just like, I don't need any more lands, and I'll throw that in. Of course, you do get the minor benefit of fueling your graveyard in case your escape cards already are there to maybe be able to escape as well. But also think about it. Do you want to land on turn 18 of the game? Not usually. So take one out of your library and take at least the small edge, even if it's not really what you kind of had in mind. When you put Gravebreaker Lamia in.
And that is solid. That does some good work there. And it's just a little bit of additional value that I think folks are not really realizing they can get.
Yeah. Okay. This next one actually came up once again at the GP. What a weird scenario. So Nightmare Shepherd. When a creature you control dies, you can make a token copy of it that's a 1/1, but has all of its other text. And when I say has all of its other text, it does. It has all of it, including mana cost. Now, that's a little weird because a lot of times when you make tokens of things, the tokens have 0 mana cost. But if you look at cards that actually say to make a token that's a copy of a card, they're different. A card that comes to mind is Pack Rat. Those are actual pack rats on the battlefield with a converted mana cost of 1 and a black and everything. Well, it turns out Nightmare Shepherd makes the same type of tokens. So I'll give you an example of where this came up. There's 2 things that come to mind. One of them's fairly obvious. They add to your devotion count. Like if you make the token that's a copy of, whatever card that costs 2 black, the token has a converted mana cost of 2 black and will add to your devotion count. So keep that in mind. But here's a weird case where it came up. I was playing against my opponent at the GP, and they had Haktos on the battlefield. And Haktos had rolled for 4. So that 4 converted mana cost was the one that it didn't have protection against every other converted mana cost it did. Well, they had locked down one of my creatures with an enchantment. I think it was a Dreadful Apathy or something, and they were tapped out at the time. That was 4 converted mana cost. So I had a sacrifice outlet, and I sacrificed it to my Nightmare Shepherd, which, by the way, was also tapped. I remember what it was. It was an Entrancing Liar that was holding down my creature. So I sacrificed it at instant speed. It came back as a token that's a 1/1, but it actually had a converted mana cost of 4, and I was able to block Haktos and trade off. And I had to ask the judge for this at the time, by the way, because I wasn't 100% sure if the tokens had it, but it turns out that they do. So even though it doesn't come up all the time, weird case with Haktos here, but like the devotion thing could come up much more often, for example.
Yeah, and I think knowing that it still has the casting cost is relevant. Nightmare Shepherd also opens the door with sack outlets to really get some wild stuff going on with like, if you have like a Lampad of Death's Vigil and a Nightmare Shepherd out, you can usually kill your opponent because you can, first of all, double sack everything. Second, if you have like a Gray Merchant, sack it, it comes back, drains them again, sack it, sack something else, it comes back. There's a lot of little tricks you can do, and you can do a surprising amount of damage to your opponent with that effect.
Yeah, you could turn basically your whole board into a big machine gun. Every 1 mana, just bing, 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 and all of a sudden your opponent's gone. This one doesn't come up super often, but it's pretty cool. It's a Crowan War. So if you have an Crowan War and an Entrancing Liar, you can wait for the 3rd chapter on a Crowan War to go up, which says all creatures that are tapped deal damage to themselves equal to their power. And you can, with that trigger on the stack, use your Entrancing Liar to tap down an additional creature that hadn't been tapped, and then get that killed as well if it's power and toughness.
No, that's cute. I have not had that come up, but I think that's a pretty good trick.
If you're really lucky and you draft 2 copies of Annex Hardened in the Forge, and you cast the second one, you'll actually get 4 Satyr tokens out of the deal. And the reason for this is that they check each other's devotion. So you have the 4 red pips. So they're each 4 power, but then of course it's legendary. So one of them needs to die, but they both will trigger off of it dying, and they'll both see that it's 4 power when it dies, and you'll get 4 tokens.
Must be nice to have 2 annexes.
Yeah, this happens in Constructed a lot.
it does actually. That does. Come up.
Yeah.
You just cast it as a make 4 tokens card.
Yeah, but in Limited, you would have to have ran pretty hot to get to that point. Blood Aspirant. People do seem to forget this in real life, and in online, it kind of just happens for you automatically. So you don't have to worry about it as much. But if you are playing it, it says whenever you sacrifice a permanent, put a +1/+1 counter on Blood Aspirant. That's just a static ability that exists on it. So if you sacrifice whatever, a Traveler's Amulet, it'll get a +1/+1 counter. A lot of times, I think the shortcut in our brain is to attach that static ability to its activated ability, which lets you sacrifice things. But remember, things get sacrificed in different ways. Lands and whatever go away, and the Blood Aspirant will continue to grow, whether it's being activated or not. Now, you don't get the other part, the deal 1 damage. That has to do it itself.
But I remember at one of the tournaments, at the last Pro Tour, Sam Party had like a double Blood Aspirant deck, and he was kind of kicking himself because he could have picked up an extra Traveler's Amulet during the draft and didn't get there.
Yeah, so that's a big extra bonus. What about Mantle of the Wolf?
So Mantle of the Wolf's kind of weird. This is the 3 and a green enchantment that gives a creature +4/+4. And then when it dies, it makes 2 wolves. But the key is it's when the enchantment goes to the graveyard from play. Mm-hmm. So what that means is if you try to put Mantle of the Wolf on one of your creatures and they kill or bounce it in response, you're out of luck. The Mantle of the Wolf never went into play, so it won't trigger. Mm. But if you've landed Mantle, or your opponent has, note that bouncing the creature or exiling the creature will still get 2 wolves because the enchantment's going to go to the graveyard from play. And likewise, using something like Return to Nature to destroy Mantle of the Wolf will also trigger it. Mm. So it's pretty hard to avoid getting wolved when they open on this card, or when they manage to land this card.
If they've actually stuck it. Okay, yeah, that's good to know. Because sometimes I think that, again, our brain does a shortcut, right? That's more along the lines of like, when the creature dies, I get things, right?
Yeah, it's the sort of thing where these cards are often are worded differently from each other, and Mantle of the Wolf is different enough that I wanted to make sure folks were aware of kind of how it works.
Okay. This next one is super bizarre. In fact, I think it probably would come up more as a mistake than anything else, but Cling to Dust. You can actually target one of the 5 cards. So it has Escape 5. Cling to Dust can actually target one of the 5 cards that you'll exile to pay its escape cost. And this might be something that you think like, oh, I need to gain the 3 life, or I want to get the extra card. So I'll target that and then I'll exile it and I'll gain my 3 life and stuff. You actually can do that. The problem is the spell won't resolve because the card's gone. Basically, the target for it has been removed, and so it fizzles. So if you were hoping to get a card or the 3 life, you won't. So it's this weird thing where you're allowed to do that legally, but it won't work the way that you want it to. It's kind of like when people cast a counterspell against a card that says can't be countered. Like you can actually
you're
do
allowed
that.
to do it.
Yeah, it's just it doesn't do what you actually wanted. So keep that in mind. That if you are trying to cling to dust one of your own things, and you also need that thing to be exiled to the cling to dust to be able to cast it for its escape cost, it will not. It will actually fizzle the cling to dust. It'll just go back into your graveyard anyway. So it won't work. Furious Rise. Just a couple of things on Furious Rise. This is the 2 and a red enchantment. In order to exile the card, so this is of course the whole point of having it is you have to control a creature with power 4 or greater. You have to do that at the beginning of your end step, or it won't trigger at all. If you don't control a creature with power 4 or greater, there's no trigger from Furious Rise. It just moves on and that's it. But if you do have a creature with power 4 or greater, it will trigger. But you also have to control that creature when the ability resolves, or you won't get to exile the card. So if something happens in that time frame where you end up with a 4-powered creature and your opponent interacts with it by the time the ability resolves, you will not get the card. So just make sure that it can actually stick. And this is, of course, more advice for people who are playing against the card, that if somehow your opponent goes like, at the end of my main phase, I'm going to do this thing, and whatever, the creature ends up being bigger, you can, if you get rid of it before the ability resolves, then they won't get the extra card exiled. Also, if Furious Rise leaves the battlefield with a card exiled that you hadn't used or cast or whatever yet, you still can cast the card even after it's gone. That card has that ability that says that it can be cast or whatever until your next turn, even if they kill Furious Rise. So keep that in mind as well.
Yeah, and it'll stick around forever.
What will stick around forever?
The card will actually stick around forever.
Oh, really?
Because it's until you exile another card with Furious Rise.
Oh, of course. Yeah, it's not until your next turn. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
We tend to think of it as if it's until your next turn, because that is generally how the card plays. But let's say you exiled it. I've never had this come up, but it actually could. Let's say you're playing like, I don't know, a red-blue deck and you exiled Kiora Best the Sea God. Mm-hmm. And then you're like, I should like bounce my own Furious Rise or remove it from play somehow sack it to Final Flare just to keep this Kiora Best the Sea God sitting there until Furious Rise. So Furious Rise doesn't exile any more cards, giving me the opportunity to play that.
Oh, that's interesting. No, that's really, See, corner cases, baby. This is what happens late in the format. I love it.
Well, also when it says Furious Rise on it, it doesn't mean any Furious Rise. It means that one.
Oh, right. It does that kind of linking thing. Okay.
Right. So
that's good to know too.
Yeah. So it's the sort of thing where you can, if you have 2 Furious Rises in play, it actually works fine. They don't counter each other badly.
Okay. So I guess you need to track which one's going to which.
What you should do is you should just exile the card onto the Furious Rise itself.
Okay. If you have both. Yeah, that's good to know. Yeah. Freaka's Libation. Just a couple of things on this. One of them is a very weird corner case, or very rare corner case, but one to keep in mind is that if your opponent has a Rasta, which is the spider. Yeah. You want to name enchantment rather than creature. Make sure that you name enchantment, because what happens is when you cast Freaka's Libation, trigger goes on the stack for a Rasta, and then they'll get a 1/2 token. And if you've named creature, they'll just sacrifice the token and get to keep a Rasta. But the fact is that the spider tokens, they are not enchantments. They are just creatures. So if you name enchantment, even though they will get the token, you'll still get to take care of a Rasta rather than having them just sack the stupid token.
That's really funny. I had not had that come up.
And also, I found this out playing as well, is that if they steal your creature, they control it, and they can sacrifice it to your own Freaka's Libation. So if they, do something to get control of your creature, and you say, I'm going to cast Freaka's Libation on you, naming creature, I wasn't sure if it's like the text is implied. It doesn't actually say this, but the text on libation has an implied that they control and not that they own. So just in case that ever comes up, they can sacrifice, whatever's on the other side. Devotion. So we talked about this a little bit before, but it does apply to other cards, particularly that comes up in this format a lot is Blight Breath Catoblepas. So the devotion gets counted when the ability resolves.
Right.
So this is important because sometimes, like, here's an example. Just you have a 2/2 and their only card that they have on the battlefield is they cast Blight Breath Catoblepas and they target your 2/2 with it. If you have an instant speed way to kill the Blight Breath before the ability resolves, say you have Omen of the Forge, if you do so, the devotion count will be counted as the ability resolves and your 2/2 will survive. It won't actually get nothing will happen to it. So keep that in mind. It also does count for cards like Ray Merchant, anything that has a trigger that counts it as it resolves. If you can interact with the creatures in between, it can be the difference between winning and losing a game.
Yeah. So what you're going to want to do is if you're the person with the Blight Breath and you suspect they have a removal spell, you'll often target a smaller creature than you would have otherwise because you want to be very sure that you're going to end up killing it.
Yeah, there's always that moment where if you need to kill something big on their side, let's say they cast Brine Giant and you've got, four black pips right now. And then you're like, okay, I'm going to cast this Blight Breath Catoblepas, and you target the giant and just sort of cross your fingers because any number of interactions could screw that up. But, you do what you got to do. This comes up all the time. We mentioned it. We got it in our Crack-a-Pack Destiny Spinner. It does say creature and enchantment spells you cast can't be countered. And I have seen many, many people cast counter spells into that. And it is enchantments as well. It's not just creatures. In this set, it basically says your stuff can't be countered. Don't forget it. I would love to know how many times that has just been overlooked. Just in the course of this set where people are just like casting stuff into it and not even realizing it. Both players just forgetting that it had that text.
Oh yeah. I mean, I had that happen literally not the last stream, but the one before that where I had a Destiny Spinner out and my opponent just countered one of my spells. And it was just like, yeah, that's not going to work out great for you.
Yeah. And it's hard to remember, to be fair. It doesn't come up so often that it's just like all the time, and Destiny Spinner isn't uncommon.
What you'll see most often is that when you are dealing with a card that most of what it does is not that's the throwaway text. People often forget the throwaway text. And in this particular case, you put Destiny Spin in your deck primarily because it's a 1 mana 2 or 2 mana 2/3, and then second because it can activate and do some cool stuff. You don't put it in your deck because of the ability to stop counter spells. But it just turns out that actually is a relevant ability, and you do get to use it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Minions Return. If you exile the creature that had it, so basically it goes to the graveyard and then it gets a trigger that says it's supposed to come back under your control. If you can exile it at instant speed with, what's it called, with Timoret or the other card that we talked about earlier that I can't remember the name of. What does that do? Cling to Dust. It won't actually come back. So
right, it does hit the graveyard for a little bit. So so you can snap it off when that happens.
Yeah, Nylea's Intervention. You can get any lands with it, not just basics. So if you have like a Labyrinth or something, that might make it a little bit more likely that you want to play it. Just again, extreme corner cases, but you can get whatever land you want with it. So keep that in mind. This one's kind of interesting. Bronzehide Lion. So Bronzehide Lion has some very strange text on it, right? That's just like, what? It's a 3/3 for 2 mana, and it can get indestructible, but it says when Bronzehide Lion dies, return it to the battlefield. It's an aura enchantment attached to your creature, and it gives the ability to give indestructible until end of turn. It's like, it just says return it to the battlefield. So if you steal it and then it dies, it actually comes back on your side and you get to put it on one of your creatures.
All right. I did not know that.
Yeah. It's kind of rude to do it. You're like, I will put your Bronze-Eyed Lion as an aura on my own creature. But yeah, you do get to do that if you can somehow make that happen. So
also, if you bounce Bronze-Eyed Lion, when it's in its enchantment form, it'll come back as it'll return to your hand and you can play it as a creature.
Yeah. Good point. That's a cool one too. This one is just another thing to say about Polukranos Unchained. Probably the most underrated card in the set. Like, it never gets mentioned as one of the, biggest bombs in the set, but this card is like pretty dang unbeatable, almost as much as the other cards that we do talk about in that way.
The show is stolen by Dreamtrawler and like Kiora Best the Sea God, but Polukranos Unchained is effectively in the same tier as them.
Right. So Polukranos' ability, of his many abilities, I should say, says if damage would be dealt to Polukranos while it has a +1/+1 counter on it, prevent that damage and remove that many +1/+1 counters from it. And what that means is that if a creature has, for example, Death Touch, interacts with it, it doesn't actually kill Polukranos because the damage itself was prevented. And since damage was never dealt with from the Death Touch creature, it doesn't kill Polukranos. Now, the counters will still come off like normal, but that's it. Yeah. And that same thing is true of Lifelink, because Lifelink says that if this creature deals damage, you gain that much life. Well, guess what? If the damage is prevented, it was never dealt, and so you don't gain the life. So Polukranos kind of brick walls those combat damage-based abilities as well.
Yeah, the only thing that's unfortunate about Polukranos is it doesn't. I tried to wonder if you could get it down to no counters but have a toughness or boost. Would it just prevent all damage? But it doesn't. You have to actually remove a counter to prevent the damage. They saw through my cunning plan.
They knew what you were going to do.
Yeah.
This is one that's kind of been around for a long time. We've talked about it on the show, but cards like Rise to Glory, if you get an aura back that enchants a permanent, enchanting it to that aura doesn't target, and it's able to get around hexproof. This, of course, is something that we talk about with Dreadful Apathy, particularly on Dreamtrawler, because that does come up a bunch. Another card that I wanted to mention is Flicker of Fate. It can do a whole ton of stuff. Of course, on any enters the battlefield creature, that's just, you get the trigger again, so that's good. You can put the ability from Dreadful Apathy on the stack and then blank it. You could use it to blank an attacker. Now, this isn't the most impactful way, but when it matters, it really does matter. They attack you with a creature. You can just Flicker of Fate it, and then it's out of combat. So it can't be declared as an attacker again, and it's not going to be able to hit you. You can also break up a double block with it. You attack with your 4/4. They put a 3/3 and a 2/2 in front. You can just blink the 2/2 and eat the 3/3. That comes up occasionally. You can reset a Saga after the last chapter goes on the stack, but before it actually gets sacrificed. So chapter 3, you draw your card. Chapter 3 goes on the stack. Then you can cast your Flicker of Fate. It'll come back in. Chapter 1 happens again. And then, the chapter 3 will resolve. But whatever happens with it, happens, but then the sacrifice part won't, because the thing's no longer there to be sacrificed. So that's pretty good. You can even do weird stuff like move an aura during combat, like Commanding Presence. You can just like upgrade it to a different creature or more favorable creature or something like that. Yeah,
so, Flicker does a million things and they're all pretty good.
Yeah, they're all like medium, right? Like on average, you're like, I'm getting my value here, but on any individual case, you might be able to get a card out of it. You might be able to not. It kind of depends.
Yeah, basically what I think it ends up being like is it ends up being, yes, there's a lot of ways to get one card out of it, but the sum of all these options is very good.
Yeah, especially if you know about these, like the ones that we mentioned here, like these corner cases and stuff where, yeah, it doesn't feel great, but sometimes they're like, attack you with everything and you're in a race scenario, right? And you go Flicker of Fate, your biggest attacker, and now I'm not taking lethal and I might be able to crack back and kill you or something. These things do happen. So keep that in mind. Last card I wanted to talk about was Labyrinth of Scophos. So this is one we've mentioned before, but it really does have a big impact on the game if the game goes a little bit long, particularly that it just removes creatures from combat. So if your opponent double blocks a creature of yours, similar to what I said with Flicker of Fate, you can just use the maze to take out one of the blockers. It just simply removes it from combat. It's no longer blocking, and then the poor creature that's left over is there to get eaten up.
Yeah, Labyrinth is ridiculous. I remember watching Benneth stream and attack, and his opponent double blocked, and then him realizing, looking at it and being like, wait, I can just Labyrinth one of these two creatures, right? And he's like, wow, this is broken. Like,
Yeah.
because the card already is very good as a land that negates an attacker. But once you start adding the ability to completely dunk on double blocks, like they just can't double block unless they're like quad blocking.
Right.
And even then, you could potentially pull your creature out of combat if you want.
Yeah, if they actually took that risk or whatever.
Well, I mean, it's also relevant too. If you're playing against someone who has Karamitra's Blessing and does not have Tramplers, so Karamitra's Blessing is, of course, to give a creature a +2/+2 and hexproof and indestructible if it's enchanted or an enchantment. So let's say they attack you with Nyxborn Colossus 6/7. You can block with your 2/2 and then Labyrinth your 2/2, and that's safer because if you just try to Labyrinth their 6/7, they could give it hexproof and counter the Labyrinth ability.
Oh, interesting. And now, but you've still blocked, so the creature's blocked and you won't take any damage.
You just have to make sure not to do it with trampling creatures.
Right. And that's actually the other thing I wanted to mention was if you do have a creature that has trample and you attack with it, even if they just do a single block to trade off with it, you can remove that blocker and all of the damage will carry over to the opponent. It is really gross with trample. It makes life extremely difficult for your opponent to do it. The other thing is that even though it doesn't say this on the card, and I'm not really, maybe it's for old school players that used to play with Maze of Ith or something, but I have seen a lot of people just instinctively untap the creature when it's removed from combat, but it's like it doesn't actually do that.
No, that's the remnant of Maze of Ith for sure.
Yeah, it has to be. Yeah. So anyway, Labyrinth of Scophos has some kind of cool cases besides the most obvious, which is just like you said, you get attacked by something, make sure that, take it out of combat so it doesn't hit you. Okay. Those are the ones I had. That's the depth that we went to. That's the deepest we've gone here for Theros Beyond Death.
Yeah. A lot of cool things. If you have any cool interactions or tips and tricks that we didn't mention, certainly let us know because there's a lot in this format. This format's really cool. A lot you can dig into there.
Yeah, and if we get enough, I'll compile them and we'll revisit it maybe next week or something. Do a little extra thing or something like that for some of the cool ones that we didn't hit up on here. Okay, that is going to do it for the show this week. We want to, as always, and especially nowadays, say thank you for hanging out with us and joining us. We really do appreciate you taking the time. We know you have a lot of awesome options as far as content goes, and we're really happy that you decided to come hang out with us. If you want to find us on social media probably experiencing a bit of a boom right now just from people having extra time at home.
I've heard that people like even will do stuff like tweet during podcasts.
No, that would be completely unprofessional. The I'm Marshall _LR. And by the way, I called you out on that and it now has 103 likes.
So people so you're saying it's good that I tweet during the podcast.
It's good that
it drives social media engagement.
and Pat Cox said, wow, you guys tweet while working? And of course, Derek, our friend, said, I thought only LSV did. Yeah. See, Derek actually knows what's up. I'm Marshall _LR and Luis is LSV pretty much everywhere. We've got, I mentioned it before, but basically any way that we have to interact, that we can have you interact with the show, we want you to. So we pretty much are on all the platforms for that. Also, there is the YouTube channel. If you're stuck at home, we've got tons and tons of episodes on the YouTube channel. Mm-hmm.
Maybe in order to interact better with our listeners, I'll do a Twitter AMA next time we record.
Ooh, wait, live? That's actually kind of cool. This one I could. Wait a minute. But that's not the topic of the show.
No, we're doing a separate show.
This idea. No. Oh God.
You figured it out.
Yeah, I finally got there. Yeah, but anyway, find us on social and hit us up on there. I also want to mention the YouTube channel. The channel, the videos that go up on the channel, they have card images now. So if you want to follow along on YouTube, you can actually just see the cards in front of you. If you have a hard time going, oh, which one was that again? Because when we get really late in the format like this, we don't read the text on every single card every single time just because we have to make some assumptions about the bulk of our listenership having done it. But we know that not literally every one of you knows every card. And if you want to hit it up on YouTube, you can actually just look down and see the cards as they go. With that, Want to mention once again our sponsor, channelfireball.com. Again, this is an important time to support the things around you, and CFB is one of those. The show's going up today on the 19th. You have until tomorrow, the 20th, to get in any orders. But as Luis mentioned, you said that they can still take part in the buy list bonanza and the buy list.
We're still accepting buy lists. So channelfireball.com/buy list will give you all the info that you need there. And we're still running our buy list bonanza. So we're announcing winners every day. And then end of the month, actually, if you can hear this, I've actually got, I have the Black Lotus, the Jace, the Gaia's Cradle, and the Underground Seas. I took them home with me. Wow. It's a shame the mail's not working. I guess I'll just have to keep them. But you're like, but Luis, the mail is working. I'm like, well,
yes,
okay.
Yes, it is. I'm sorry. You do not get to keep them. So, and they can still do that through the end of the month as was scheduled. Okay. So great. That goes all the way to the end of the month. And then Luis will be doing. Yeah,
you can submit a buy list until end of the month. And then there's a 10-day grace period of when we actually get the cards. You're not entered into the contests until we physically receive the cards.
Okay. Cool. So again, check that out over at channelfireball.com/buy list to actually do the selling itself. With that, that's going to do it for this week, and we'll see you next time.
So I don't know, what the Carnitas status is in Seattle, but finding good Carnitas here in Denver has been a real challenge. So for those of you who don't know, Carnitas is Mexican style, like slow cooked pork, and you can get it like Chipotle, right? Like it's pretty widespread. Like most places will have it, but the last step is the most important, which is crisping it up on the griddle right before you serve it.
Oh God, I love that part.
I mean, Marshall, you remember when you took a trip to Oakland and we hung out for a couple days?
I absolutely do. We went to that one place right by the train station there.
Yep. There's a place, Taco Sinaloa, which if you've listened to the show, I've probably talked about 10 times on the show. It is the first place we went when I picked up Marshall. It's the last place I go when I'm leaving Oakland. Also the first place.
It was very good.
And their Carnitas tacos are just the best. The best tacos, the best Carnitas, the best everything. And I decided to take a stab at it because, see, a lot of the places here, and I imagine it's true most places around the U.S., they don't take that last step. When you go to Chipotle and you get Carnitas, they've got the big tin, right? They've got their thing of pork, and it is slow cooked pork, but it's soft. They put it in your burrito and it's soft because that's the consistency of pulled pork, slow cooked pork, that sort of thing. But what Taco Sinaloa does, and what I actually did today, is they take that pork once it's already cooked, for ready to go and everything. They throw it on the grill for not even that long, just to make it nice and crispy. And so I since I've got some time on my hands here at home and wanted to make some nice meals, I had the foresight to get a pretty nice pork shoulder.
Wow, look at you!
And what I did was 2 days ago I put it in a dry rub. So I mean, it was like a mix of like paprika, garlic powder, salt, black pepper, cayenne. I didn't use brown sugar. That's more for like the barbecue pork preparation. So this is more of a kind of a Mexican pork preparation. So like chili powder, and I didn't have any chipotle powder. I would have thrown that in. I just didn't have any right now, and a little bit of cumin. And you rub it all over the pork, put it back in the fridge. The next day at 8 a.m., I popped in the oven at 225, which is really low. 225 Fahrenheit is not a high heat.
Right.
And it literally cooked for 13 hours, all day. And before I went to bed last night, I used a meat thermometer. I highly recommend a meat thermometer if you really want to get, it takes the guesswork out of cooking meat. And it means that you don't have to worry, is my chicken quite done yet? Or, am I going to overcook my steak? I just put the meat thermometer in when it hits 200, which is, again, it takes quite a while to get there. It actually hit 190 and it was ready, but I aim for 200 normally. And over 165, pork's completely fine to eat. But you want to hit even higher internal temp because you really want it to fall apart. You want it to be really, really kind of like tender. Because what you then do is I let it sit in the oven for a while afterwards. Then I take it out, and then I just took 2 forks and just made pulled pork. You take the fat off initially, and then you shred the rest of the pork. And then I didn't do anything with it. I put it back in the fridge because first of all, it was 11 o'clock at night. Second, what we did for lunch today was I got a cast iron skillet and I put in some olive oil, wait till it got nice and hot, and then put in some chopped onions and the pork right out of the fridge. And then, kind of just griddled it until it was nice and crispy and then made tacos with it. And
dude, you are killing me right now. I am so hungry and this sounds so good.
And you don't even have to get too fancy with the tacos. I just used some corn tortillas that I also heated up on the griddle, and then a little bit of salsa and lime and chopped onions. So that's it. I didn't have any cilantro, unfortunately. But my point is, first of all, making oven roasted pork is not that hard. It takes a long time in terms of hours, but it took me 5 minutes to make the dry rub, 5 minutes to put the rub on, and then the next day I just put it in the oven. That's all I had to do. The most labor intensive is probably shredding it at the end, but even then that took 15 minutes at most.
And then, this was a shoulder?
Yeah, this was a shoulder. You want to put fat side up so it drips down onto the rest of the.
Right.
You can use pork butt also. But you don't need to use pork loin. Pork loin's like a little pricier and higher quality or more tender, but that's better for other preparations, I think. When you're just cooking this thing for 13 hours, it's actually, it'll make any sort of meat really tender.
Yeah, it gets all those connective tissues broken down so you can use whatever.
And then the last step, of course, of just frying it up on the skillet takes 10 minutes or whatever. Yeah. So, but the net result was really, really good. And, I'm a big fan. So I think that that's a good way to pass the time, a good way as any.